My husband had decided that I no longer belonged in his carefully curated circle of elite connections. He told me not to appear at the company gala, the very company I had helped him build, and his family fully supported that decision. For once I didn't argue. I simply packed a small bag and drove toward the coast, chasing silence instead of confrontation. The sun was melting into the horizon when my phone lit up. A cascade of messages from investors. Something had gone terribly wrong. At 5:45 that morning, Evan had pointed toward the corner of our bedroom and said, "Stand there. You're distracting me." He wanted to practice his investor pitch. Dressed sharply in his tailored designer suit, he looked every bit the rising tech visionary preparing for a grand performance. For 3 years, I had helped him rehearse those same presentations, polishing every detail from his tone to his posture. But this time his tone carried new disdain. "Actually, just leave," he said. "This is for a different level of audience. They're international venture capitalists, not your old McKinsey clients. My mother will be there tonight to support me properly. She understands this world." I stood at the doorway, watching him rehearse his smile in the mirror, realizing that somewhere along the line, I had faded out of my own marriage. His dismissal shouldn't have shocked me. The warning signs had been accumulating for months, subtle slights disguised as fatigue or pressure from the upcoming Series C funding round. Yet in that quiet moment, as he studied himself like an actor memorizing a role, I understood this wasn't stress. This was who Evan Hensley had become, or maybe who he'd always been beneath the startup sweatshirts and late-night insecurities. 3 years earlier, this same man couldn't even stand in front of a mirror without shaking. I remembered the night I found him in our garage at 3 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by crumpled notebook pages, struggling to deliver a 2-minute pitch for his first investor meeting. His hands trembled so violently he could barely read. I stayed up all night, guiding his breathing, reworking his notes, recording practice sessions until he finally spoke with confidence. By sunrise he nailed the pitch, and we secured $500,000 in seed funding. Now, that same man dismissed my McKinsey clients like they were irrelevant. Yet those very clients had become Nexus's earliest enterprise customers when he couldn't even afford a sales team. I had spent 5 years at that firm building relationships, calling in favors, arranging weekend meetings, and turning casual conversations into formal demos. The result: 3 contracts worth $2 million in recurring revenue that sustained Nexus during its fragile first year. But that part of the story had been conveniently erased. "Are you still here?" Evan asked, eyes still fixed on his reflection. He was practicing his confident executive laugh, a hollow rehearsed sound that had replaced the genuine one I used to know. The real laugh was softer, slightly nasal, ending with a small snort he used to be embarrassed about. I hadn't heard it in 6 months. I walked to the kitchen, my bare feet silent against the marble floor we'd chosen together when we signed the lease for this penthouse. Evan had insisted we needed a place that impressed investors. I'd agreed back then, not realizing I was helping him design a stage, not a home. My phone buzzed with a message from Maya Tran, my former McKinsey colleague and now Nexus's head of operations, a position I had recommended her for. Her text had no words, just a screenshot that froze my breath. A budget spreadsheet for that evening's gala. The kind of detailed document I used to prepare for Evan when he didn't yet understand company finances. Under the section labeled Strategic Considerations was a line item that read, "Attendance optimization. Spousal attendance limited to board members and C-suite executives meeting specific criteria." Beneath that, a note, S. Hensley does not align with current corporate positioning. Refer to family advisory input. Family advisory input. That could only mean Evelyn and Richard Hensley, his parents, the same people who once called Nexus Evan's expensive hobby, and urged him to return to law school. Their tune changed only after the Series B funding closed, when suddenly their son's net worth reached $20 million on paper. Now they were the ones determining which spouse fit the image of a suitable corporate partner. I thought about the garage where Nexus had been born, the folding table that doubled as a desk, the whiteboard scribbled with my handwriting because Evans became unreadable when excitement took over, and the air mattress we used when coding marathons left us too tired to drive home. I had written half of the early platform code myself while Evan focused on architecture. My fingerprints were on every algorithm, every function that had helped make him rich. The coffee maker beeped, snapping me back to the present. Through the kitchen window, dawn spread across Seattle, reflecting off the downtown glass towers. Somewhere in those high-rises, investors were preparing for the same gala that now excluded me, ready to pour millions into Nexus Technologies. They'd shake Evan's hand, toast his brilliance, and never know that the algorithm that caught their attention was something I had developed during one of his breakdowns, when he'd been convinced the entire project was doomed. My phone rang again. "Claire, I'm so sorry," Maya said breathlessly. "I just saw the final attendee list. I can't believe they're doing this to you." "It's strategic," I replied automatically, echoing Evan's favorite phrase. "Apparently, I don't project the right image for international investors." "That's complete garbage and you know it," she shot back. "You built half that company. Your connections brought in the initial revenue. Hell, you were the one who taught Evan how to read a balance sheet through the bedroom door, no less." His voice echoed from down the hall, carrying the kind of hollow confidence only expensive executive coaching could teach. "Nexus Technologies represents the future of integrated platform solutions," he declared to his own reflection, performing lines that once would have made him laugh. Gone was the man who had joked that our goal was to make boring business software slightly less boring. Every gesture now belonged to Evelyn Hensley's training, the perfectly timed pauses, the polished diction, the posture of a man raised for country clubs and charity galas. She had been sculpting him for months, molding her son into someone who could mingle with venture capitalists and social elites. And apparently, that transformation required a wife who met specific criteria. "Maya," I asked quietly over the phone, "does everyone at the company know I wasn't invited tonight?" Her silence told me everything. Finally, she said, "The executive team knows. Evan announced it at yesterday's leadership meeting. He said it was a strategic decision, made in consultation with the board and family advisors." There it was again, family advisors. I'd been reviewed by committee and deemed unfit for presentation. My throat tightened as I set my phone down on the counter. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It had been written into corporate protocol. By 2 o'clock, the suffocating silence of the penthouse became unbearable. I changed into the same charcoal suit I'd worn to our Series B closing, a suit that once symbolized partnership, and drove to Nexus headquarters. The building gleamed beneath the afternoon sun, all glass, steel, and ambition. Marcus, the security guard who'd known me since our co-working space days, straightened at the sight of me. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hensley," he said softly, avoiding eye contact. He knew too. The elevator to the 20th floor moved with cruel slowness. When the doors opened, I saw Jennifer, Evan's newest assistant, typing furiously. The moment she looked up, her face drained of color. "Mrs. Hensley, Mr. Hensley is in a meeting." "I know," I said, walking past her toward the glass-walled corner office. Through the transparent partition, I could see him in full performance mode, gesturing at slides while 3 men in immaculate suits nodded along. Behind him, Elliott Bay shimmered under the sun, the perfect backdrop for his curated image of success. Every inch of that space was designed to impress, right down to the absence of me. 20 minutes later, the meeting ended. The investors filed out, offering firm handshakes and polite smiles, barely acknowledging me. Evan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," I said. He stepped aside without a word, letting me in. The faint trace of his cologne, French of course, a gift from his mother, lingered in the air. I moved toward his desk, the massive oak surface now a physical divide between us. "You came here to make a scene?" he asked, straightening the Hermes tie Evelyn had given him last Christmas, the same one he'd admired like it was a badge of admission to her world. "I came here for an explanation," I replied evenly. "A real one. Not a corporate memo disguised as empathy." He exhaled, weary and patronizing all at once. "Claire, these investors tonight aren't local. They're from Silicon Valley, international venture capitalists who expect a certain level of sophistication. You're brilliant, no question. But this is about cultural fit. Cultural fit? I repeated slowly. I have an MBA from Northwestern. I worked at McKinsey for 5 years. What culture exactly am I failing to fit into? It's not that simple, he said, moving toward the window. These people can sense things, subtle cues. The way someone holds a wine glass, the kind of small talk they make, whether they summer in the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard. You don't speak that language. I speak 3 languages fluently, I shot back, including the programming languages that built the platform they're investing in. That's not what I mean, and you know it. I did. I remembered the dinner last month at his parents' estate. Evelyn had invited her country club friend, Isabel Whitmore. Her husband ran a private equity firm. When I walked into the drawing room, because of course they called it that, I heard Evelyn's perfectly clipped introduction. And this is Evan's wife, Claire. She used to help with marketing back when the company was still small. Used to. Was small. Every word chosen to erase me. Isabel's polite smile had been practiced, the kind that dismissed and condescended all at once. How lovely. And what do you do now? She'd asked. Before I could answer, Evelyn interjected cheerfully, steering me toward a cluster of women discussing the hospital charity luncheon. Claire would love to hear about the fundraising committee, she'd said, as if my background in corporate strategy had evaporated the moment Nexus crossed 9 figures in valuation. Meanwhile, Evan and his father had retreated to Richard's study with Isabel's husband to talk expansion plans, the future of the company I had helped create, while I stood by a tray of champagne, trapped in a conversation about floral centerpieces. Now, staring at Evan's reflection in the office window, I said quietly, "Your mother made it very clear last month that I don't belong in your world." He turned, his face settling into that same composed mask he wore during board meetings. My family understands this environment. They've lived in it for generations. They only want what's best for the company. What's best for the company, I repeated. Or what's best for their image. Sometimes those are the same thing, he said, moving back to his desk, aligning papers that didn't need aligning. Look, he continued. My family agrees that sometimes the most supportive thing a spouse can do is step back. This isn't personal. Your family agrees, I echoed. When exactly did Evelyn and Richard become the board of directors for our marriage? They're advisors, he said stiffly. They have experience with this level of society. This level of society. The phrase tasted metallic sour. A level where wives were vetted like resumes, evaluated, categorized, and found unfit. They're trying to help, Evan added defensively. Mom says your presence might send the wrong signal to investors worth hundreds of millions. These people expect a certain type of presentation. A certain type of wife, you mean? I said, my voice low. He didn't answer, and that silence was all the confirmation I needed. Evan glanced at his wrist, at the brand new Patek Philippe that had appeared after the last funding round, as if luxury itself were now part of his job description. The gala starts in 4 hours, he said flatly. I need to prepare. That was it. No apology. No recognition of what his words had done. Just another efficient dismissal, as sterile and calculated as a termination letter. I stood, studying the man I had once married 7 years ago. Somewhere beneath that immaculate suit and the performance-polished tone was the anxious programmer who used to beg me to run mock interviews with him, whose hands would shake before every pitch. But that version of him had been methodically erased, replaced by someone sleek, scripted, and utterly detached. You're right, I said quietly. I don't belong in this world you've built. A world where people are appraised like stock options and marriages are treated like merger agreements. I walked toward the door, then paused. Your parents must be thrilled, I added softly. You've finally become exactly what they always wanted. Someone who measures human worth in units of strategic value. The drive back to the penthouse took 12 minutes. I spent each one making a mental checklist. By the time I parked, I had already found a listing for a rental cottage in Cannon Beach, Oregon, available immediately. The photos showed weathered wood walls, mismatched furniture, and a panoramic view of the Pacific, everything Evan would have dismissed as beneath our status. I packed deliberately, choosing only the things he had disapproved of. The soft jeans he said looked too casual, the university sweatshirts he claimed were unprofessional, the sneakers he once tried to throw away because they weren't designer. Each item felt like a small act of rebellion or maybe recovery. The penthouse itself resembled a museum more than a home. Every painting, every piece of furniture had been selected to signal wealth, not warmth. As I walked through one last time, the place felt colder than ever. I left my keys on the marble counter beside the invitation for that evening's gala, the one addressed solely to Evan Hensley. No note, no dramatic goodbye, just absence, clean, deliberate, final. Let him explain that to his strategic advisors. The drive out of Seattle felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 3 years. In my rearview mirror, the skyline of glass towers grew smaller. Those glittering buildings filled with people constantly assessing each other's market value. Ahead, the Pacific Coast Highway stretched open, whispering of something I hadn't felt in years. The possibility of being enough, exactly as I was. By the time dusk settled, my headlights were slicing through thick coastal fog. For hours outside Seattle, my GPS signal began to flicker just as the gravel road appeared, winding down to a small wooden cottage perched on a bluff like a bird's nest. My chest loosened at the sight. A woman stood waiting on the porch, holding a lantern that glowed gold against the mist. Her name was Lucia. Gray hair twisted into a messy bun, paint-splattered overalls, eyes kind and unguarded. "You must be Claire," she said with a faint accent I couldn't place. "You look exactly like someone who needs to disappear for a while." Her words should have unsettled me, but instead they felt like permission. She handed me a set of heavy, old-fashioned keys and gestured to a bottle of red wine resting on the railing. "Local vineyard," she said. "For whatever you're escaping, or celebrating. Sometimes they're the same thing." The cottage was the antithesis of our Seattle penthouse. The floors creaked, the windows rattled in the wind, and the furniture looked like it had lived many lives before ending up here. Yet, as I set my suitcase down and looked through the salt-streaked glass at the endless ocean, I felt more at home than I had in years. That night, I sat on the worn couch with Lucia's wine and listened to the sea's steady dialogue with the shore. No city noise, no email alerts, no muffled rehearsals from the next room. Just the waves breathing in and out, and the occasional cry of a night bird. I switched my phone to airplane mode and buried it beneath the pile of clothes Evan had always criticized. Morning came with intrusive sunlight and the raspy squawks of seagulls bickering over breakfast on the sand below. I brewed coffee in the ancient percolator, the kind that demanded attention, and stepped out onto the deck. The Pacific stretched endlessly before me, vast and indifferent, unconcerned with valuations, presentations, or whether someone's spouse met specific criteria. I spent that first day walking until my legs ached, letting the cold October air clear the remnants of boardrooms from my lungs. I paused often, to study the perfect spiral of a seashell, the curling script of dried kelp, the tiny crabs darting between tide pools. My hands remembered how to handle the old camera I'd bought in college, back when I dreamed of being a photographer before Mackenzie claimed my ambition. By the second day, a new rhythm began to take shape, one that would have horrified Evan. I woke whenever my body decided, not when an alarm dictated it. Coffee on the deck had become my ritual, watching the fog dissolve into sunlight while the Pacific slowly revealed itself. My mornings stretched into long, aimless walks. I read actual books again, the kind with pages that smelled faintly of dust and neglect, the ones I'd bought years ago but never opened because there was always another pitch deck to edit, another investor meeting to polish, another spreadsheet demanding revision. By the third morning, I was halfway through a novel about a woman who sold everything to buy a vineyard in France when Lucia appeared on my deck. She carried her own coffee mug and a sketchpad tucked under one arm. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, though she was already lowering herself into the chair beside me. We sat in silence for a while, her pencil gliding across the page with quiet confidence. I pretended to read but found myself watching her instead. Her movements were assured, unhurried, the kind of grace that comes only when a person stops apologizing for taking up space. "You've got the look," she said finally, without glancing up from her sketch. The look of someone recalculating their entire life. I laughed softly. That obvious? I've run this place for 15 years, she said, still sketching. I've seen every kind of escape artist, divorced executives, burned-out doctors, blocked writers, betrayed spouses. You, my dear, are in the just realized I've been living someone else's life category. The sound that left my throat wasn't quite laughter. It was too bitter for that. My husband decided I wasn't sophisticated enough for his new social circle, I admitted. Apparently, I don't meet the criteria to attend his company's investor gala. The same company I helped build. Lucia's pencil paused mid-line. She looked up and studied me, her gaze sharp despite the web of laugh lines around her eyes. Let me guess, he got successful, and suddenly you weren't the right kind of accessory anymore. I nodded. His parents agree that I might send the wrong signal to international investors. Lucia snorted and returned to her drawing. You know what I love about the ocean? It doesn't care about your net worth. Waves crash the same on billionaires and artists alike. Sand gets in everyone's shoes. The tide doesn't check your portfolio before it comes in. She was right. The Pacific didn't care that the Hensley family had deemed me unrefined, that I had failed to meet their carefully curated standards. It didn't care about strategic criteria or social polish. It simply was vast, untamed, honest, and immune to pretense. That afternoon I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I cooked. No timer, no countdown to when Evan would return. No thought about presentation or lighting for a photo he could post online. I made pasta with butter and garlic, nothing fancy, and ate it outside while the sunset turned the sky into a watercolor Lucia could have painted herself. Later, while browsing the cottage's bookshelf, I found a small leather journal. Its pages were blank but slightly yellowed at the edges, like it had been waiting for someone to use it. I started writing, my hand aching from disuse. At first, I wrote about Evan, the humiliation, the betrayal, but eventually the words shifted. I wrote about the photography business I once dreamed of starting before Mackenzie made me practical. The novel I had outlined but never begun because there was always something more urgent to do for Nexus. The teaching position I turned down because Evan insisted we focus on our company. Except, of course, it had never been our company. It had been his dream, his name, his victory lap. I had simply built the scaffolding beneath it. Somewhere between the coding sessions and the late-night budget models, I had lost sight of my own dreams, the ones that didn't involve IPOs or market valuations or charming people who measured human worth in equity percentages. On the 4th morning I walked into town. The center was barely a block long. A handful of weathered buildings that looked like they'd been standing since the 1970s and refused to change. The local coffee shop had mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. The owner, a cheerful woman with a flower tucked behind her ear, smiled when I ordered and didn't ask for my resume, my alma mater, or my LinkedIn. She just handed me a mug and wished me a good morning. By late afternoon, I was walking back to the cottage, the salty breeze tugging at my hair. I carried a paper bag with a still warm loaf of bread, baked fresh while I waited. The simplicity of that exchange, money for bread, no social calculus involved, felt almost radical. After years of every interaction being filtered through strategy, this was human. The sun had started its descent when I settled on the deck again, wine glass in hand. October 7th, 7:15 p.m. 400 meters away, the doors of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Grand Ballroom would be opening for the Nexus Technologies Investor Gala. I knew because I'd toured that venue with Evan 6 months ago. He had squeezed my hand and whispered that it would be our victory celebration. That memory felt foreign now, like it belonged to someone else's story. I could still picture every detail, the precise lighting we had chosen together, the floral arrangements from the vendor I'd researched, the custom cocktails I had suggested to match our European investors' preferences. My invisible fingerprints were everywhere, except on the guest list. The wine burned slightly against the salt air. I tried not to imagine Evan straightening his tie for the 100th time, Evelyn glittering in a designer gown chosen to impress, Richard gliding through the crowd with practiced ease. All of them pretending I had never existed, or worse, that my absence had been a mutual decision. My phone sat face down on the table, still locked in airplane mode. But curiosity, that old ruinous instinct, began to stir. What if something had gone wrong? A catering issue, a technical glitch, a failed presentation? Or, though I hated myself for thinking it, what if Evan needed me? At 7:43 p.m. I finally turned the phone on. The screen erupted at once. A relentless cascade of notifications. The sound became a single, continuous hum as messages poured in faster than the device could process them. 26 missed calls. 42 texts. 17 emails labeled urgent. The phone grew warm in my hand from the overload. Maya's name dominated the screen, her calls, her messages, her escalating panic. The first few texts were composed and professional. Then they dissolved into chaos. Claire, please call when you get this. Something's happened with the German investors. Evan needs you to call immediately. Everything is imploding. Where are you? This is insane. The investors are walking out. Evan's having a meltdown. Maya's messages came one after another, fast and frantic. But what made me sit bolt upright wasn't hers. It was the one that followed. From Evelyn Hensley. In 7 years of marriage, my mother-in-law had never contacted me directly. Not once. She communicated through Evan or, on the rarest occasions, via a formally worded invitation embossed with her family crest. Yet there it was on my screen. Urgent family emergency. You must call immediately. My pulse quickened. I called Maya first. She answered before the first ring finished. Thank God, she gasped. Behind her I could hear chaos, voices shouting, chairs scraping. Someone yelling about damage control. Claire, where have you been? Everything's falling apart. What happened? I demanded. The Germans happened, she blurted. The due diligence documents. Oh God, I tried to warn Evan but he wouldn't listen. Maya, slow down, I said. What documents? She took a shaky breath. You know that junior analyst Evan hired last month? Kevin something? He was supposed to compile the due diligence package for the German investors. Evan told him to include everything. Anything that showed Nexus's operational excellence. My stomach tightened. And he did, Maya said softly. He included everything. Every internal memo, every email chain, every budget file, even the one about tonight's gala. The one that listed you as excluded for not meeting criteria. And Claire, he included Evan's email to the board. She shuffled papers. I heard the rustle, the hesitation before the blow landed. He wrote, my wife's presence might send the wrong signal about our corporate sophistication. After consultation with my family advisors, we've determined her attendance would not align with our positioning for international investment. The wine glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the deck. Red liquid spread across the wood like blood. The Germans saw it, Maya whispered. Anke Vogel herself, managing partner at Rhine Technic Ventures, the one controlling $2 billion in assets, was reviewing the documents during the cocktail hour. Evan was halfway through his presentation about company values and culture when she stood up. I froze. She what? She stood up, Claire. In front of 200 people, the entire board, every major investor. She held up her tablet with the document on it and said, Maya's breath caught. She said, Mr. Hensley, could you explain why your wife, who according to your own company history helped build this platform, has been excluded from tonight's event for failing to meet sophistication criteria? I sank into the deck chair, my legs trembling so violently I could hardly stay upright. The room went dead silent. Maya continued in a near whisper. Evan tried to explain, said it was out of context, that it was mutual. And then Anke said, God, everyone heard it. We don't invest in companies whose leadership treats people as strategic liabilities. If this is how you value the person who helped build your company, how will you treat other stakeholders when it becomes convenient? She said it into the microphone, Claire. Then she closed her portfolio, stood up and walked out. Her entire team followed. 6 other international firms left with them. The Americans are still here, but they're all on their phones with their boards. I pressed a hand to my forehead, dizzy. The press was invited tonight, Maya went on breathlessly. Tech bloggers. Financial reporters. Someone already posted it on Twitter. It's trending. I looked at my screen, the app icons pulsing with unread notifications. Unknown numbers. LinkedIn messages. Even a text from my old college roommate asking if I'd seen the news. Evan must be. He's destroyed, Maya said flatly. He tried to keep talking after the Germans walked out, but his voice was shaking. Evelyn's been running around the ballroom trying to do damage control, but people are already pulling up the leaked files on their phones. Someone sent the entire due diligence package to TechCrunch. The headline reads, Nexus Company excludes founder's wife from gala for lacking corporate sophistication. It's everywhere. Through the line I could hear doors slamming, overlapping voices, the shrill pitch of panic. Then came Evan's voice, high-strained, barking orders about containment strategies. Evelyn's voice followed, sharp and furious, demanding someone fix this immediately. I should go, Maya said finally. It's total chaos. But Claire, that German woman, before she left, she said something to Evan. Loud enough for the entire room to hear. She said, Success that requires diminishing those who helped you achieve it isn't success. It's just ego with a business plan. Maya paused. She's my new hero. And then the line went dead. I sat there, surrounded by the shattered glass and the roaring of the ocean, the waves suddenly sounding too close, too alive. My phone continued to vibrate, lighting up over and over. Each alert another explosion in the dark. 57 unread texts. 31 missed calls. Emails multiplying like a virus. Financial news banners began sliding across my screen. Nexus Technologies stock plunges in after-hours trading. German investment firm withdraws from Nexus deal. Breaking. Multiple investors exit Nexus gala following document leak. Each headline felt unreal, like reading about strangers. Strangers who had stolen my life and now watched it burn. Then my phone rang again. Evan's photo appeared. The one from our wedding, back when he still looked boyish and grateful, before ambition turned his love into calculation. I let it go to voicemail. Another call followed. Then another, from an unfamiliar Seattle number. And another after that. I turned the ringer off but couldn't stop watching the silent calls stack up, one after another like accusations. At 8:47 p.m., I finally listened to the voicemails. The first one carried his CEO tone, crisp, controlled, desperate to sound in charge. Claire, we have a situation that requires immediate management. There's been a misunderstanding regarding tonight's documents. Call me back so we can coordinate our response. This affects both of us. The second message, 12 minutes later, cracked around the edges. Claire, I know you're getting these. The Germans have withdrawn. The press is here. We need to present a unified front. Please call me. By the third, his voice had collapsed into raw panic. The board's meeting right now. They're discussing my resignation. 3 more firms just pulled out. That's $280 million in commitments gone. You have to help me explain this. Tell them it was your choice not to attend. And by the fourth, all pretense was gone. Claire, please. Please. TechCrunch posted the story. It's everywhere. My phone won't stop. Reporters, investors, the board. His voice broke into static. And for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel small or silenced. I felt nothing at all. They're saying I've destroyed the company's reputation. This can't be how it ends. Not after everything we built. Evan's fifth voicemail didn't sound like a CEO anymore. It barely sounded human. The stock is down 38%. 38. Claire, do you understand what you've done? The board's panicking. We need you to say it was mutual. Please, I'm begging you. His voice cracked on that last word, and for a fleeting second I almost pitied him. Almost. The next voicemail began before I could process the first. This one was colder, cut from a different kind of steel. Claire, said Richard Hensley, each syllable sharp enough to draw blood. I don't know what game you're playing, but you're destroying our family's reputation. Evan's career is in ruins. Evelyn is being bombarded with calls from our associates. If you don't immediately release a statement supporting Evan, I will pursue every legal option available. This vindictive destruction ends now. Vindictive destruction. The words echoed through me like a cruel joke, as if I'd engineered this. As if I'd written those humiliating documents or leaked them myself. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply left when I was told I wasn't wanted. Then came the voice I least wanted to hear. Evelyn Hensley. "Claire dear," she began, her tone attempting warmth but landing somewhere between patronizing and desperate. "Surely we can handle this like adults." Yes, there were some unfortunate misunderstandings about tonight's event. But that's no reason to let Evan's career burn down. Surely you can put aside your feelings for the sake of the family's reputation. We've always welcomed you. There was a pause, and I could almost see her smoothing her dress, choosing her next words carefully. "Despite the differences in our backgrounds, don't let pride destroy everything. Call me back so we can craft an appropriate response." Even in crisis, she couldn't resist that dig. Differences in our backgrounds. To her, my middle-class upbringing was still a flaw that required her mercy. Even her pleas for help carried hierarchy. Another call. Another message. This time from Martin Graves, chairman of Nexus's board. The same man who had once told me, at a company dinner, that I was Evan's secret weapon. His voice was polished, professional, transactional. "Claire, Martin Graves here. I'm calling with a proposal that could benefit everyone. The board is prepared to offer you a consulting contract, $200,000 for 6 months of advisory work, minimal actual duties. In exchange, you'd sign a standard NDA and release a statement clarifying that you chose to skip tonight's event to focus on personal projects. Contracts could be ready tonight. Funds transferred Monday. This protects everyone's interests and allows us all to move forward. Please call me back within the hour." A bribe. A beautifully worded attempt to buy my silence. $200,000 to agree I was exactly what they'd claimed. Irrelevant, unsophisticated, unnecessary. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family or the board, it was the press. Forbes. "Ms. Hensley, would you like to comment on tonight's events at Nexus? We're running a story about corporate culture and spousal value in tech startups." The Wall Street Journal. "Can you confirm whether you were formally excluded from the gala?" Bloomberg. Reuters. TechCrunch. One after another they poured in, each message sharper than the last, each reporter circling the same fresh kill. My phone battery drained from 60 to 40% in minutes, just from trying to process the flood. Through it all, I sat on the deck, staring at the indifferent ocean. The waves rose and broke, eternal, disinterested in human collapse. For 100 meters away, Evan's world was disintegrating. But here the tide kept its ancient rhythm. Then a message from Maya cut through the noise. "Security footage from the ballroom is online. Someone filmed Ank's walkout. It's already at 50,000 views. Evan tried to have it removed, but it's everywhere now. The comments are brutal." I didn't open the video. I didn't need to. I could already picture Evan's face. The tight jaw, the darting eyes, the performance mask cracking under pressure. I'd seen that expression in smaller doses before. When a deal fell through, when a product crashed, when his parents' praise came with conditions. But this time there would be no one standing beside him whispering reassurance. No one smoothing the edges of his failure. Another voicemail. Evan again. "Claire," he said, his voice raw, stripped of authority. "The other investors are leaving. All of them. The entire gala's over 2 hours early. Everyone's gone. Mom and Dad left without saying goodbye. I'm standing in an empty ballroom that costs $40,000 to rent. Please just tell me what you want. What will it take for you to help me?" What did I want? The question felt enormous and hollow all at once. I wanted the last 3 years back, the nights in the garage when we believed in something pure. I wanted the man who'd once cried with joy when our first customer signed. I wanted the life we had before ambition metastasized into arrogance. But as I sat there with his broken voice still echoing in my ear, I realized none of that was possible. The phone felt heavier than ever, glowing with 37 unheard voicemails, each one a small monument to desperation. The Oregon sunset deepened as I listened. The sky layered in molten gold fading into violet, beauty unfolding completely untouched by human drama. What will it take? The question assumed I had demands, that this was a negotiation, that I held leverage I intended to spend. But watching the last light vanish over the Pacific, I understood the truth. I didn't want money, or apologies, or even revenge. Revenge required energy, attachment, emotion. I wanted silence. My thumb hovered over the power button. One press and I could call Maya back, return Evan's messages, step once again into the machinery of crisis management grinding through the night in Seattle. But instead I exhaled long, steady, final and pressed down. Evelyn would already be gathering advisors, drafting statements, and planning her next round of damage control. Richard would be on the phone with lawyers, trying to contain the fallout through intimidation and leverage. Evan would be pacing either the empty ballroom or his corporate apartment, refreshing social media again and again, watching his reputation disintegrate in real time. They all wanted the same thing, for me to join their panic. Every missed call, every frantic voicemail, every pleading text was an invitation to re-enter the chaos they had created, to help them manage the consequences of decisions they had made about my worth. Even Martin Graves' consulting offer assumed I could be bought back into their narrative for the right price. I pressed the power button and held it until the screen went dark. Then, for the first time since college, before smartphones became prosthetic organs, I opened a drawer, found a tiny screwdriver, and removed the phone's back panel. The battery slid out easily, and with it, every connection to the crisis that still buzzed in the Seattle night. The device was just an object again, glass, metal, and silence. It felt heavier now, more real. Airplane mode could be undone with a swipe. This required intent. A deliberate act of separation from the temptation to check, to scroll, to see whether Evan had called again or whether his empire had finally collapsed completely. I poured another glass of wine. My hands didn't tremble this time. The shards from the earlier spill still glittered across the deck, catching the last remnants of light like scattered rubies. I clean it tomorrow. Tonight I wanted to sit in the stillness, the strange, almost sacred quiet that follows when something ends and you finally stop trying to repair it. The ocean had gone dark, visible only as the sound of white-capped waves rolling and breaking in the distance. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other lives went on, dinners, arguments, celebrations. None of them aware that a tech company's gala had imploded, or that a woman on a coastal bluff had just chosen silence over participation. Around midnight I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Lucia appeared, wrapped in a heavy cardigan, her paint-splattered overalls visible beneath it. She carried a thermos and 2 mugs. One look at me, the dismantled phone, the empty bottle, and she settled into the chair beside me without asking. "Bad news or good news?" she asked, pouring something hot and herbal into one of the mugs and sliding it toward me. I inhaled the steam. It smelled like comfort. "I'm not sure yet," I said. Then, because her quiet presence made honesty easy, I added, "My husband's company just collapsed at a gala I wasn't invited to. Investors walked out. His career's probably over. And I'm sitting here feeling something that's not happiness or sadness." "Relief," Lucia said simply. The word landed with precision. I looked at her. This woman I'd known less than a week, and felt tears prick my eyes. Not the hot, furious kind I'd shed in Seattle when I found that exclusion document, but cooler ones, almost cleansing. "I should feel terrible," I admitted. "I should want to help him or at least feel sorry. But all I can think about is how quiet it is here, how the ocean doesn't care about any of it." Lucia nodded slowly, sipping her tea. 15 years ago, she said, I left a white shoe law firm in Manhattan. I'd spent a decade there, 100-hour weeks, no vacations. I just won them their biggest case. 9 figures on the line. The next day, the managing partner called me into his office. I could see the flicker of memory across her face in the dim porch light. "I thought it was about partnership," she continued. "Instead, he told me I wasn't partnership material. Said I was brilliant in the courtroom but lacked the polish their clients expected. Too intense. Too focused on the work instead of the performance. Suggested I'd be happier somewhere smaller." "After you won them millions?" I asked. "After I won them millions," she confirmed. "So I walked out, packed my apartment, drove cross-country, ended up here. Bought this place, started painting, and never went back." "Did they try to get you back?" Her smile was small, steady, The kind that comes from peace, not pride. For months, the case I'd led started falling apart. The client was furious. They offered me senior partner, my name on the door, the corner office. I never answered. Eventually they stopped calling. The client left the firm entirely. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes catching mine in the warm light. You know what I learned? Silence is the most powerful response to people who misunderstand your value. They're prepared for anger, negotiation, even tears. But silence forces them to face their choices without your participation. I looked down at the dead phone between us, a small silent monument to that truth. Evan in his empty ballroom, Evelyn working her phones, Richard drafting threats, Martin sending bribes. All of them expecting me to play my part. My friend Maya called before I shut it off, I said. The German investor who walked out, Ankvogel, released a statement. She said, "Success that requires diminishing people isn't success. It's just ego with a business plan." Lucia's mouth curved into a grin. Smart woman. She's right, I said quietly. It's already everywhere. Evan's probably being torn apart online. And how does that make you feel? Lucia asked. I thought about it carefully. Satisfied isn't quite the word. Vindicated feels too active. It's more like watching gravity do its work, the natural consequences unfolding without me. Like I finally stopped trying to manage outcomes that were never mine to manage. Lucia raised her mug in a small solemn toast. To natural consequences, and the freedom of not interfering. We stayed there until nearly 2 in the morning talking about everything except Evan or Nexus. She told me about her art installations, about relearning trust in her instincts after years of performing logic for clients. I told her about the photography dreams I'd buried, the novel I'd outlined but never written, the pieces of myself I'd traded to help build someone else's empire. When I finally went inside, the cottage was quiet, the sea still whispering through the night. I left the dismantled phone on the table, a tiny, deliberate monument to the silence I had finally chosen. In the mornings, I kept extending my cottage rental. My days drifted by quietly, walking along the beaches, helping Lucia prepare for her upcoming gallery show, and eating simple meals that required no documentation, no purpose, and no audience. I began to understand what it meant to exist without trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I never would be enough. Revenge, I was beginning to learn, didn't always involve action, planning, or perfectly designed consequences. Sometimes revenge was choosing peace while someone else's carefully built world collapsed under the weight of their own choices. Sometimes it tasted like salt in the air, like herbal tea, and like the absolute stillness of a phone that would never ring again. The week at Cannon Beach stretched into 8 days, then 9, then 10. Each morning I woke to the rhythm of waves and the absence of urgency. And each morning I chose to stay just one more day. Lucia never asked when I planned to leave. She simply adjusted the rental agreement, brushing away my concern about her other guests with a paint-stained hand and a quiet comment that the cottage always seemed to know who needed it. But on the 11th morning I woke with a different kind of feeling. Not dread exactly, but a calm certainty that the silence had done its work. I had found what I needed to know. About myself, about what I wanted, and about who I was when Evan's ambitions no longer shaped my days. Now it was time to see what was left of the life I'd walked away from. The drive back to Seattle felt far longer than the escape had been. October had deepened into late autumn. The trees along the highway stood stripped of their leaves, everything washed in shades of gray that matched my uncertainty. That morning I turned my phone back on and let it charge while I packed, but I didn't check the messages. There would be enough time to face that chaos once I arrived. The city came into view through the rain around 4 in the afternoon, the skyline rising from the mist like a familiar stranger. I had lived here for 7 years, but driving through downtown toward our penthouse, I felt like a visitor studying the fragments of another life. The coffee shops where Evan and I had planned our first strategies, the restaurant where we'd celebrated our first major contract, the park where we used to walk on Sunday mornings before success began to consume every weekend with obligations and events. The story truly began in the parking garage. I pulled into my designated spot and saw that Evan's Tesla was gone. In its place remained only empty concrete, faint tire tracks marking his departure. I sat in my car for several quiet moments, engine off, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal and trying to steady myself for whatever waited above. The penthouse felt deserted the instant I opened the door. It wasn't empty. The furniture still stood where we had left it, and the art still hung neatly on the walls, yet the space felt hollow as if the life had drained out of it. The air was stale, untouched for days. Mail piled up on the entry table, mostly bills and company correspondence addressed to Evan. I walked slowly from room to room, noting the absences that revealed his exit. His toiletries missing from the bathroom, half the closet bare where his suits had hung, his laptop gone from the study desk. He had taken only what mattered to him and left the rest like traces of a life paused mid-sentence. On the kitchen counter lay a single envelope, my name written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside were divorce papers, the tone formal, the language cold. Irreconcilable differences appeared several times. A bureaucratic way to summarize 3 years of gradual disappearance. There was no note, no personal word, nothing beyond the legal phrasing. Evan had ended our marriage as he conducted his business, through his lawyer, keeping even this separation strictly professional. I expected to feel something, anger, grief, even relief. Instead, there was only a distant curiosity, as though I were reading about a stranger's life. The terms were practical and fair. Division of assets, negotiation of property, all reasonable. The lease still bore both our names. It could all be resolved through attorneys. There would be no direct conversation. I left the papers on the counter and turned toward the windows, watching as city lights began to pierce the early evening darkness. Somewhere out there, Evan was living in a corporate apartment, still dressing in his tailored suits, still practicing that polished confidence for whatever remained of his career. The thought carried no satisfaction, no victory. It simply existed. The next morning, I met with Lauren Pierce, the attorney Lucia's friend had recommended. Her office occupied a modest suite in a building far from Seattle's gleaming corporate towers. The furniture felt comfortable rather than impressive. The paintings on the walls clearly original pieces by local artists. Lauren greeted me with a firm handshake and steady eyes that looked as though they had already heard every story and judged none. "I've reviewed the divorce filing," Lauren began once we'd settled with coffee. "It's straightforward, no unusual clauses, but you should know what's been happening with Nexus Technologies since the Gala incident." She opened a folder thick with printed articles and financial records. The first page showed a graph of Nexus's stock value plunging sharply after October 7th. 40% drop, she explained, her finger tracing the steep line. 3 board members have already resigned, including your former father-in-law, Richard Hensley. The company not only lost the German investors, but 2 other international partners in late-stage negotiations. The total capital withdrawal is around $400 million. I stared at the figures, struggling to connect them to the company I had once helped code in our garage. 400 million. The number felt unreal, too vast to tie to the small deliberate choices that had led to this moment. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "And Evan, what's his position now?" "Technically, he's still the CEO," Lauren explained. "But the board has already removed several of his key authorities. At this point, he's little more than a figurehead while they search for new leadership." She glanced down at her notes. "His parents withdrew all financial backing 2 days after the gala. According to my sources, Evelyn Hensley told several people at her country club that they needed to protect their other investments from being linked to the scandal." The irony stung, though I couldn't help but notice it. Evelyn, who had once fretted that my presence might send the wrong message to investors, had now sent the clearest message of all, abandoning her son the moment his reputation became a liability. "There's more," Lauren said, sliding another document across the desk. "International expansion plans have been suspended indefinitely. The London and Singapore offices that were supposed to open next quarter have been cancelled, and a number of key employees have already left for competitors." "How many?" I asked. 43 in the past 10 days, she replied. "Most of them from the original engineering team, the same people who built the early platform with you and Evan." I sat back, remembering those first chaotic months. The long nights in the garage, the engineers who had accepted pay cuts to join a dream, the ones who believed in what we were building. They had poured their time and talent into something that now seemed to be dissolving before their eyes. I couldn't blame them for walking away. They were taking the last pieces of real knowledge with them. My phone buzzed while Lauren was organizing the documents. Maya's name flashed on the screen. With Lauren's nod, I put her on speaker. "Claire, thank God." Maya's voice came through, tight and breathless. "Are you back in Seattle? Can we talk in person?" "I'm back," I said. "What's happening?" "What isn't?" she replied. "The office feels like a graveyard. Half the desks are empty. The ones that aren't are filled with people updating their LinkedIn profiles. Evan barely leaves his office, and when he does, he looks like he hasn't slept in days. Evelyn and Richard haven't shown up for a single board meeting since the scandal broke. Everyone says they're too embarrassed to face anyone." We arranged to meet later that afternoon for coffee at a small cafe near Pike Place Market, far enough from Nexus's offices and the corporate restaurants where we might have run into someone from that world. Maya arrived looking utterly drained. Her usual immaculate appearance was replaced by dark circles under her eyes and hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. We found a corner table where no one could overhear us. "It's dying," she said immediately, lowering her voice. "The company. I've seen restructurings and layoffs before, but this is different. This is watching something decay from the inside because the foundation was rotten from the start. Investors are not just suggesting Evan's resignation. They're demanding it." She leaned closer, her tone sharp with disbelief. "The remaining board members are meeting every day to figure out how to remove him without triggering the clause that guarantees him an enormous severance package. Meanwhile, he's in his office calling every contact he's ever had, trying to repair the relationships he destroyed climbing to the top." Maya paused to take a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "You want to know the worst part? He's confused. Honestly confused about why no one is taking his calls. The same investors who chased him 3 months ago now won't even respond to his emails. He said in a meeting yesterday that this was just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated quietly. She nodded. "He really doesn't get it. He thinks this is a public relations issue, something that can be managed with the right messaging. He can't grasp that people saw exactly who he was and decided they don't want to work with that man." My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. The sender's name stopped me cold. Ank Hoffman, the German investor whose dramatic walkout had triggered everything. The subject line read, "Simply a conversation worth having." I opened it while Maya watched. The message was short, written in the precise, efficient tone I recognized from European business correspondence. "Miss Hensley, I hope this message finds you well. Following the events of October 7th, I wanted to reach out personally. I followed your work and contributions to Nexus Technologies and believe you were systematically erased from a story you helped create. I would like to discuss funding a consulting firm under your leadership. Anyone who helped build a company from nothing while being undermined deserves a chance to create something where their worth is inherent. I'll be in Seattle next week if you're available to meet." I read it twice before handing my phone to Maya. She skimmed it once, then let out a disbelieving laugh, the kind that breaks through exhaustion like a spark in darkness. "Oh my God," she said, her voice half shocked, half elated. "Ank Hoffman wants to fund you. Do you understand what that means? She manages over $2 billion in assets. She doesn't make casual offers." The email glowed on the screen, pulsing with promise. Somewhere across the city, Evan was still making desperate phone calls that went unanswered. His parents were avoiding the company they had once ruled, and his empire was collapsing under the weight of arrogance and misplaced loyalty. Meanwhile, in a quiet coffee shop far from the skyscrapers of ambition, someone was offering me the chance to build something new. Something that didn't require defending my worth because it would be built upon it. I looked at Maya, then back at the message, feeling a subtle but certain shift inside me. It wasn't revenge, nor even vindication. It was the calm realization that sometimes the most powerful answer to being erased is to become impossible to ignore. Right there in that cafe, I typed my reply to Ank Hoffman. My thumbs moved steadily over the screen while Maya watched, her expression flickering with restrained excitement. The message was brief, professional, and accepting her invitation to meet the following week. When I pressed send, Maya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes shimmered with something that looked like vindication but carried the quiet weight of hope. The meeting with Ank took place several days later in a hotel conference room overlooking Elliott Bay, neutral ground, belonging neither to the life I had left nor to the uncertain one I was beginning. She arrived precisely on time, composed and assured without a trace of arrogance, dressed in a tailored suit that suggested confidence rather than ostentation. We shook hands and her grip was firm, the kind that conveyed respect rather than dominance. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, her accent delicate but unmistakable. "I've done my research on your work at Nexus Technologies, your platform architecture, enterprise client strategy, and the bridge funding you secured in the 6th month, all of which are documented in early filings before someone decided to edit the record." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of documents I had nearly forgotten existed, early investor presentations listing me as co-founder, email threads showing my technical input, even a business journal photograph of Evan and me standing in our garage office, back when my presence was still considered an asset rather than an inconvenience. "This is who you were before you were erased," Ank continued. "I want to fund the consulting firm that allows you to be that person again. Not in service of someone else's dream, but building your own." 6 months later, I stood in my new office on the 7th floor of a building in Fremont, far from the downtown towers where ambition was measured by square footage and elevator access. The space was modest. 3 rooms with wide windows that framed a glimpse of Puget Sound, the water glinting between buildings like a quiet promise of freedom. My name was printed on the door in clean, understated lettering. Hensley Strategic Consulting. I had kept Evan's last name not out of nostalgia but because it was still legally mine, and changing it felt like giving him more recognition than he deserved. There was, in fact, a poetic symmetry in achieving success under the same name he had tried to erase from his legacy. The firm launched quietly in April. No announcements, no press releases. Only word of mouth through the network of people who had watched the Nexus collapse and drawn their own conclusions. Ank had kept her promise, providing the initial capital and introducing me to clients who valued integrity over performance. Within 2 months we had 3 major contracts. The first was a woman-founded biotech startup, developing diagnostic tools for early cancer detection. Its founder, Lena Tran, had reached out after hearing my name from Ank, explaining that she needed someone who understood what it meant to build something genuine, amid a culture obsessed with appearances. I helped her refine her series of pitch and connected her with investors who asked about her science before her resume. The second client came through Maya, who had finally left Nexus in March when it became clear the company could no longer be saved. She had joined a mid-stage fintech startup and recommended me to their CEO, a leader struggling to expand without losing the sense of trust that had made the team succeed. I spent 6 weeks embedded with them, guiding their growth while preserving the values that had first drawn their employees in. The third client was a nonprofit devoted to bringing technology education to underserved communities. The pay was modest, but the purpose was rich, the kind of work that mattered in ways Nexus never had. During our first meeting, the executive director told me she'd sought me out specifically because she wanted a consultant who understood that true impact wasn't measured in valuations or exit strategies. My office reflected the simplicity I had come to value. Nothing curated for status, just authenticity. A sturdy wooden desk I'd found at an estate sale, comfortable chairs for clients, shelves lined with strategy books and poetry collections alike. On one wall hung several of Lucia's paintings, vivid abstracts that reminded me of Cannon Beach and the week that had reshaped my life. But the most meaningful objects sat on my desk in a plain frame. A photograph I had taken that night in October. A sunset spilling gold and violet across the Pacific. I'd captured it minutes before switching my phone back on and discovering the full collapse of Evan's world. The picture contained no people, no brands, no markers of achievement. Only sea and sky, endlessly conversing, indifferent to human drama. Every morning when I arrived and every evening before I left, I looked at that photo. It reminded me that the truest form of moving forward was never dramatic or strategic. It was simply the quiet act of building something real, while others faced the consequences of their own designs. From time to time, news of Evan reached me through professional channels, the kind of background hum that moved through Seattle's tech world whether you wanted it or not. He was still the CEO of Nexus Technologies, though the company now bore little resemblance to what we had once built together. Its valuation had stabilized at roughly 40% of its peak. International expansion remained frozen, and the once vibrant culture had hardened into something cautious and uninspired. In May, Maya forwarded me an announcement from the Seattle Times with a single word attached: wow. Evan was engaged to Charlotte Davenport, daughter of one of Seattle's oldest families, whose wealth stretched back generations and whose social ties ran through every elite institution in the city. Evelyn had been quoted in the piece, describing Charlotte as, "from a good family who truly understands our world." The implication was so transparent it barely needed explanation. I studied the engagement photo, searching for traces of the man I had once known. Evan stood in a perfectly tailored suit, Charlotte beside him in something refined and expensive. Both smiled with the precision of people performing for an audience. He had obtained everything he thought he wanted: the polished wife, the corporate title, his mother's approval. Yet the photograph held a hollowness no amount of lighting could disguise. According to Maya's contacts, Evan still went to the office every day, still knotted his Hermes ties, still practiced his executive posture. But now he presided over a company stripped of its energy and its soul. The engineers who stayed at Nexus did so out of necessity, not belief. Their commitment was to their paychecks, not the company's vision. The innovative, daring culture we had once built together had been replaced by cautious calculation. Every idea now passed through endless committees designed to prevent another misstep rather than to encourage creation. The Hensley family's social standing had also begun to decline, a development that, according to Maya, caused Evelyn particular discomfort. Word spread quietly through her network that Evelyn and Richard had stepped back from several country club committees, their names missing from the boards where they had once been fixtures. Even their legendary holiday party, which used to draw nearly 200 guests from Seattle's elite, had diminished to a subdued dinner for a handful of close acquaintances. One evening in June, Richard was overheard in a downtown restaurant, his voice louder than intended after one drink too many. "We never should have encouraged Evan's ambitions beyond his capabilities," he confessed to his companion, a single line that revealed more about the family's values than any polished interview ever could. When things went well, they had proudly claimed credit for Evan's achievements. When they didn't, they faulted him for overreaching. The irony didn't escape me. The same family that once labeled me unsophisticated now avoided the public eye, their social capital tarnished by the very scandal they had helped orchestrate. Evelyn, always so fixated on optics, had delivered the most revealing message of all when she abandoned her son the moment his reputation became inconvenient, only to return when his new engagement restored her standing among polite society. I turned from my computer and gazed out at Puget Sound, watching a ferry glide through the late afternoon light. My phone sat quiet beside the framed Cannon Beach photograph, silent except for genuine business calls and the occasional message from the few people who mattered. There were no frantic voicemails, no emergencies to extinguish, no desperate attempts at control. Only the steady rhythm of work built on something real. Lucia had visited just last month, taking the train up from Oregon to see what I had created. She had wandered through the office, studying each detail with the calm precision of an artist, then stood by the window looking out at the water. "You did it," she said softly. "You built something that's actually yours." The photograph on my desk caught the light as the sun shifted, that October sunset flaring like a slow ember. During that week on the coast, I had learned something that took months to fully understand. The most graceful form of revenge was never about tactics or elaborate payback. It wasn't about inflicting pain, orchestrating collapse, or watching retribution unfold. It was simpler, quieter. It was about building a life anchored so deeply in your own values that other people's opinions no longer carried weight. It was finding peace in the distance between who they said you were and who you became anyway. It was realizing that the ocean's indifference to hierarchies and reputations was, in its own way, A lesson in wisdom. Evan still had his title, his polished fiancé, and his mother's conditional approval. He still wore his designer suits to an office that grew emptier with every passing quarter, leading a version of the company that looked successful but had lost its soul. And I remained in my modest office, helping founders remember that those who build the ladder deserve to climb it, too. I worked with clients who valued integrity over image, creating something authentic in ways Nexus never had. The ocean didn't care about influence, pedigree, or perfect optics. It simply kept moving, rising, falling, endless and free. I had learned to carry that same indifference within me, not as detachment but as liberation. The freedom to create without pretending, to thrive without diminishing others, and to rest in the knowledge that I was already enough. If this story of quiet triumph resonated with you, press that like button right now. My favorite moment was when Claire chose silence instead of confrontation. When she removed her phone battery while Evan's world collapsed 400 meters away. What was your favorite part? Share it in the comments below. And don't miss more stories of resilience and reinvention. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.